Joining us in the Informer studio is the State Member for Ferntree Gully. His name is Nick Wakeling. Nick, welcome.
Welcome to us.
You have a number of responsibilities: Shadow Minister for Emergency Services, Child Protection, Industrial Relations and Workplace Safety. Can we start there?
Yep.
One of the biggest stories to come out of the last few months has been the fiasco in the quarantining of those hotels with the return travellers who've come from all parts of the world to return to Victoria. And we saw the state government tell us well and truly that they knew what they were doing, they handled the situation as best they could, and suddenly we went from being the leading state in Australia for containment of the contagion and this, that and the other, to being the leper in the colony. What are you to make of what's happened and what's transpired?
Look, hotel quarantine has been a fiasco. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. It's not only impacted on Victorians, but it's impacted on the nation.
Yes.
You look at what affects Victoria is affecting Australia, and no wonder Australians are really upset and angry with what's happened with hotel quarantine. I mean, we've had a situation that the government here, who had a responsibility for the management of those arrivals, to ensure that they were adequately quarantined, to ensure that they, before they re-entered the Victorian community, were well. The government didn't rely on the ADF, didn't rely on the police, and in fact relied on security guards, some of whom were recruited through Gumtree. I mean, Gumtree, for heaven's sake. They turn up to work, no PPE, no training, and they were afforded responsibility for the management of hotel quarantine.
Well, weren't we told that we're going to have world's best practice? We're going to be right across what was going on. We didn't need any assistance from anyone. And in fact, the exact opposite is coming out. It's emerging. And over the last couple of days, we're hearing stories now. Various stories are emerging from the various news outlets, and they're telling us that the Premier said at the time we were simply swamped with the number of cases, it's very easy, he says, in hindsight, to be able to say we should have put our hand up and asked for assistance. I would have thought that's the first thing you do in any emergency. If you cannot contain what's going on, you look around you to see where the assistance can come from, whether it's federal level or whether you reach across the Parliament and you reach other members of the political marketplace and say, hey, listen, we are in a real jam here. We need to get out of this terrible challenge that's facing us. What can you do? What recommendations can you provide? I would have thought that was legit and reasonable behaviour, but clearly not.
Well, it seems pretty clear this was more about ego than it was about managing the quarantining of those new arrivals, many of whom we know were suffering from COVID. I mean, the Premier had the opportunity, like other states, to utilise the ADF, to utilise the police, but no, he saw fit to manage this himself. He saw fit to only engage security firms. He and his government made the decision to go down this path, different to every other state, and what have we seen as a consequence? Over 5,500 cases of COVID post-July, and we know that 99% of those cases can be genomically linked back to two locations. 90% of cases back to Ridges Hotel, 9% back to the Stanford Plaza. The disaster is the pure responsibility of this government, and this government is failing to take responsibility for its own actions. There are OH&S breaches. I've called on investigations to ensure that the government is investigated for these failures. Let's think of this as a chemical company. Could you imagine a chemical company where CEO, management, middle management, staff, contractors managed the site so poorly that chemicals were emitted from that factory, killed people, closed businesses, forced a stage 4 lockdown on Melbourne? What do you think would happen to that company? That company today would be shut.
It wouldn't survive. Speaking of chemical companies, we're seeing now hundreds of trucks delivering waste material to Bacchus Marsh.
Yeah.
They're moving it from the current site in, I think it's Footscray.
Yeah.
What are we to make of that?
Well, I mean, again, this is typical, unfortunately, of this government that is big on itself and not taking into account the views of local communities. I mean, you know, these chemicals are going to be placed, 200 metres from, schools, from households.
From future developments.
Local residents have their views have been largely ignored. Local members who are representatives of this government refusing to stand up for their local communities. The views of local residents, roughshod by this government, and it's unacceptable.
Nick Wakeling, where is the health minister in this? Jenny Mikakos?
Well, she's very quiet, isn't she? I mean, the point in all of this is she is the Minister for Health for this state. She is part of the crisis cabinet. It was her responsibility to ensure that we had an adequate health response. We now have the worst outbreak of COVID of any state. She was the health minister. She was responsible. She sat around the cabinet table. But of course, under this government, no one is taking responsibility for the damage that they have caused and the damage that they've wreaked across this state.
Can I give you an inkling of some of the problems with the hotel quarantine that, as you say, has turned into a fiasco? I heard through agents of mine, through friends of ours and contacts who are running major hotels in Melbourne, and they were keen to put their hand up and to assist, and of course to drive some money back through their hotels, especially when all the business was closed. When they heard the onerous responsibility that was put on them, and then they asked, are we going to have a police presence? Are we going to have the army on board? They gave them a phone number. And they said, ring this in case of emergency. Doesn't that give you an idea of just how poorly this whole situation has been mismanaged from the very beginning?
Victorians are angry, and they have every right to be angry. We're in stage 4 lockdown, which has now gone from 6 weeks to 8 weeks, and who knows how long that will continue. And it's purely because of the mismanagement of hotel quarantine by this government. We haven't seen it anywhere else.
What did you expect of the announcement on Sunday when the Premier said we're going to give you a roadmap to opening the state up again, to allowing business to return, retail to return, people to go back to school? And what did you make of the traffic light approach to getting us open and again functioning as a state of Australia?
People are angry. I mean, the anger of those people who have been contacting my office since that announcement on Sunday is palpable. Let's remember, the Herald Sun ran a story last week, which was the leak, and the government said out-of-date document. It's a document that is not what we're proposing.
Not relevant here.
Not relevant. We're not going to deliver this. Well, guess what? It's exactly the document.
It was spot on.
It was spot on, and people are despairing. I mean, businesses are going to fall off a cliff. I mean, I was today, just one of my local cafes, 80% down in revenue. And that's a long-standing business. They may survive only on 20% of revenue, but let me tell you, there's lots of businesses that have already told me we're shutting up shop. And they're only paying staff at the moment because they're on JobKeeper. As soon as JobKeeper finishes, lots of people are no longer going to be receiving any income from their employer, and they're going to end up on JobSeeker. That's what the future is for many people in this state.
Let's try and be positive. What can the opposition offer the state at the moment? The next elections are how far away?
Over 2 years, November 2022.
Okay. What can the state opposition do? Can it continue its campaign to remind Victorians and to showcase the anomalies and the missteps of the government? Is that its tactic up until election time?
Well, it's a dual role. We're going to hold this government to account. I mean, let's remember that when we first got into this situation, March, April, I mean, we were in lockstep with the decisions that governments were making around the nation to deal with COVID. Ever since the failures of hotel quarantine, contact tracing, those failures of this government, Victorians are angry, and we will continue to hold this government to account. But equally, it's our responsibility to come up with a positive agenda. We cannot rebuild this state without business back on its feet. And this is where this government is failing. Business community telling me, telling my colleagues, telling the state they haven't been consulted, they're not being heard. We want to work with industry, big, medium, small, to ensure that we have the engine room of the Victorian economy pumping again to ensure that we can get people back in employment. That's our way out of this problem.
Back in employment and jobs.
Absolutely.
Without jobs, no confidence. No confidence means business can't do. No one can do anything.
Absolutely.
Nick Wakeling has been our guest on The Informer, the member for Ferntree Gully. We wish you continued success, keep fighting the fight, and doing what you can to not only represent your constituents, but help the government address some of its shortcomings and see if we can find a roadmap that actually has a clear direction and one we can all follow.
Thank you.